Thank you very much for the introduction. And yes, today I'm going to present about machine learning enhanced models for simulation and optimization in electromagnetism. This is a session on metasurfaces, and I am indeed going to talk about metasurfaces. A little bit about my group first. I started a group at Georgia Tech in 2023, and I have really three thrusts in my group that are all relevant to the talks I've had the chance to see today. One is about how can artificial intelligence enhance large-scale PD constraint optimization. One way is to enable or accelerate simulations. Another way that I'm presenting towards the end, hopefully I will have some time, is leaving the physics to a numerical solver, but trying to improve the search space. The second thrust of my research is to do multidisciplinary collaborations on specific devices in augmented reality or environmental monitoring and others. And on the theory side of this, for inverse design, it's really about how to formulate the optimization problem in an efficient way. And sometimes how to characterize the results. So often in large scale optimization, we're bound to do gradient-based optimization, and we can only access local optima. And being able to characterize those via bounds is sometimes very helpful. And the last thrust is about bridging theory-driven models and data-driven models, combining, again, neural networks and solvers, but in that case, in order to reach better accuracy. And so I'm going to start with those fast approximate solvers for optical metasurfaces. It's been a decade I work on this. So this is a science paper that is almost 10 years old from my PhD group. And so the idea of metasurfaces is that in contrast to traditional optics, which relies on the propagative property of bulky curved lenses, metasurfaces harness the effect of scattering. They are thin compared to the wavelengths. They are very large in diameter, thousands of wavelengths. They are often patterned in an aperiodic manner with sub-wavelengths pattern. And the question we're asking as an optimizer, because I forgot to mention, I'm in the School of Computational Science and Engineering. So I actually only do computational stuff and design. I don't even have a lab. I rely on collaborations to actually realize the devices experimentally and in real life. But the question for a designer is how to reflect and transmit light in a prescribed way, how to find the geometry that will do that. And from the get-go, it's a hard problem. When I joined the group at Harvard for my PhD, I was an applied physics student in my first year. And what I was seeing is that the group was kind of doing some type of trial and error to design metasurfaces. And it seemed to me very inefficient because we're not using really the math of Maxwell's equation nor optimization very well. And very quickly, I realized the reason why, and the reason why is that it was a very hard problem to simulate in the first place. So it was really bound to heuristics at the time because just simulating those devices was very expensive. And so in my first year, I decided to switch to an applied math PhD and to actually work on that specific problem and make that problem tractable. The challenge comes from those two very big difference in length scales. You have those sub-wavelength features, and then you have those diameters that can be up to thousands of wavelengths. And so it's just a very hard problem to simulate because of that difference of length scale, because you need to resolve for the smaller features, but then also for the larger feature. And so if the forward problem is already hard to simulate, then the inverse problem is even harder. And so, we have this large scale optimization problem. We have a set of parameters P that define a metasurface, and we're trying to optimize a function of the physical fields, but we're having a bottleneck here at computing those physical fields. It takes a large amount of resources and time. And so the idea here that I want to present in the first third of my talk is to use approximate solvers that are enabled, that are accelerated with data-driven surrogates. So the idea of an approximate solver is to rely on an approximation. Here, the approximation is honestly fairly crude. If the idea is this is a top view of a meta surface on the left, and if you zoom in on that red square here, well, you can see that like around the circle in the middle, the neighboring circles are kind of looking the same. And so the idea of the locally periodic approximation is to assume periodic boundary conditions for that particular circle. And you do that for every one of them. And then that way you get you get an approximate of the field above your meta surface, and then via a principle of equivalence you can evaluate the field in the far field. Now I showed like a kind of a red square that looked pretty good, but if I use this blue square here, I can see that the center circle is very different from some of its neighbors. So this fairly crude approximation, which has been used all over the place, it is still surprisingly robust to a lack of periodicity, at least for lenses, for problems that require a slowly varying field. The geometry might vary more drastically at Fresnel zones, for example, for lenses. But since the field, it's just about the phase, right? The field itself is still, the complex number is still fairly continuous, and it still works pretty well. I doubt this, by the way, I doubt this approximation would work very well in more extreme cases. Like now we're thinking about optical computing using this type of scattering devices. The locally periodic approximation is going to hurt much more there. Anyways, so what is the locally periodic approximation? This is another side view to explain it. So I have this aperiodic structure at the top. So all the pillars here have different lengths. And I want to have a reconstruction of the field on the top. And so what I do is to get the segment in blue, I do this blue simulation, which is periodic. And then to get the one in red, I do this red simulation, which is also periodic, and so forth and so on. The big saving we get here is that instead of solving a computational domain that is as big as the meta surface, we can rely on periodic boundary conditions and basically solve only for for a single pillar. Now I apologize, it changed the color coding. That's because the Georgia Tech template for presentations likes to put blue and gold, which are Georgia Tech's colors. And so now we transform this big simulation with millions of pillars. Here I didn't show millions of pillars, but you can imagine them into millions of simulations that are very small. And then I'm telling you, that's just what you need to simulate the far field. In particular, when those pillars are like sub-wavelength, the periods are sub-wavelength. And why am I talking about that in a surrogate in a surrogate model presentation day? It's because this type of solver can really be dramatically accelerated with a surrogate model. Why? Because we're really trying to learn a mapping between a few parameters to a few parameters. Here, I just want to map the width of a pillar to the complex transmission. Indeed, because I care about things only in the far field, because I have periods that are sub-wavelengths. I need a zeroth order transmission Fourier coefficient, so the transmission coefficient propagates, and so it's a single complex number I need to learn. And so I can train a data-driven model to accelerate that. The data-driven model, what it does is that instead of solving Maxwell's equation every time, it's just going to evaluate a fit, and that's why it's orders of magnitude faster. So this is a quick validation of like such a solver. So when you use brute force for a lens coming at an angle. So you have like a plane wave coming at an angle. You want to focus on a focal spot. And the brute force and the approximate solver, they have fairly similar results. And in fact, if you look at the cross section of those two, you can see that, like, of course, they're not exactly the same. Because like one is solving the full Maxwell's equation, the other one is doing an approximation. But you know, we like the approximate solver still because like it's fairly accurate where we care about, which is here at the focal spot. Because to design a lens, we just maximize the intensity at the focal spot, and it's orders of magnitudes faster. Just to give a little bit more context about this type of methods, there's been, you know, a decade of research on this. So there is this locally periodic approximation I presented. There are other ways to break down a middle surface, which also works. So for breaking the domain into larger domains, so definitely not sub-wavelengths, you can use a perfectly matched layer instead of periodic boundary conditions, or you can add a little bit of the neighbor. It's called overlapping domain. All those are slightly more accurate. It can be slightly more accurate than LPA, the locally periodic approximation. But a big advantage of the locally periodic approximation is that it's the only one that is compatible with surrogate models, because you still have just a few inputs and a few outputs. And it's more important about the few inputs, because when you have a data-driven model, you're facing the curse of dimensionality. And so as you add neighbors, as you have a bigger cell, you're adding degrees of freedom in the input, and that's a problem. So anyways, now that we have a large-scale solver that can solve things fast, we can do the optimization of that meta surface, and that's called inverse design. Inverse design is just saying optimization. Why is it inverse? It's actually not an inverse problem. It's a source of confusion. It's just the idea of starting with the goal and optimizing directly instead of like building heuristics towards a goal. And so here, now we're equipped with our approximate solver, and we can optimize for a target physical property. I'm going to go quickly, but basically this solver was useful to design devices that were experimentally validated. For example, here we're optimizing a lens with extended depth of focus. Basically, what a lens with extended depth of focus, field, sorry, does is that instead of focusing on a single point, it focuses on a segment in depth. And so it is a worst case optimization. It can be set up as a worst case optimization problem where you want to set the parameters that define a meta surface that will maximize the minimum intensity on that segment that you care about. So here, the design I used was also pillar design. Here, that was a cylindrical meta surface, so it was still 2D simulations. In fact, we can see that the theory and experiment match remarkably, and we could increase the depth of focus 3 times. This is a polychromatic lens that is correcting chromatic aberration for a discrete set of wavelength. We did in a paper that we published in Nature.com for 3 and 6 wavelengths. So it's not broadband, it's just for a few wavelengths. And here again, we set it up as a worst case optimization problem where we want to find the meta surfaces, the meta surface that will maximize the minimum intensity at the desired focal spot for the different wavelengths. And this is, for example, for red, green, and blue, which has an interesting application in augmented reality. And again, here we could see that there was virtually no chromatic aberration. Just there was a 1.5 centimeter focal length, and the chromatic aberration was the order of micron, or a few microns. And it behaved like a lens. We're happy with that. So those are really the idea is that like this type of solver enables new applications. And just to drive home that that the data the solver the surrogate based solver enables a simulation. That last lens here, which is 1 centimeter in diameter, I had 1 billion pillars to optimize. It was a fun large scale optimization problem. If you wanted to just simulate it once with like state-of-the-art methods for full Maxwell's simulation, such as transition matrix, would take years. The GPU accelerated the finite difference time domain from Fan's lab in Stanford, Shanhui Fan, would take months, and that's like using fairly generous of linear scaling of their published results. It's just a very big problem. It's tens of thousands of wavelengths in diameter. It would still take months. If you do LPA, that's where you get like a significant boost already, because you know, breaking that big simulation domain into many smaller ones, you can even parallelize them. You can already do that within half a day. But really, the game changer is the surrogate model, because like this brings down the simulation of the entire metasurface for the property of interest to 1 second, which is then like very well suited for a gradient-based optimization, which usually requires, you know, a few runs, you know, depending on how hard the problem is, of a few hundred iteration using the gradient. So that's it for the fast approximate solver and how surrogate model enables them. Now I'm talking about surrogate models. So the simulation I showed you here, like everything here was using a data-driven model, but it was a traditional one. It was just using Chebyshev interpolation. Chebyshev interpolation is great because for smooth functions, which Maxwell's equations are fairly lead to fairly smooth functions, it converge exponentially. And so it doesn't, it's very point efficient, but it's still here when we have 1 or 2 parameters, that works very well. It still suffers the curse of dimensionality, meaning that the number of training points it needs is a power of the number of inputs to the model. And that scales really poorly. And so the idea is like, well, how can we, you know, do better? So scientific AI surrogate models for PDE properties in particular. So we saw great work on neural operators, which learn a solver. Here, we're just trying to learn a property, right? So we're trying to learn a complex transmission. We're not trying to learn the entire solution to Maxwell's equation, but just like a single property. So the main benefit is that, you know, we're evaluating a model instead of solving a PDE. And so it's very fast to evaluate a data-driven model. That's great. And the limit here, there's a caveat, a pretty big one, is that we introduce training costs, right? Which suffer the curse of dimensionality. So that's a pretty big caveat. And so really, you know, you're faster, but you really need to take the computational cost as a whole, right? You need to have your speed up, which is here like your delta mu, which is the how much faster you are at evaluating, times how many times you reuse it, right? Needs to amortize your training cost. Here I called it beta, right? So you need to have this data. You need to be either very data efficient, need a very small beta, or need a very big R, right? I showed you just before an application where R was very big, because for a single simulation, I was calling my surrogate model millions of times, up to billions of times. And so here, you know, I could maybe invest a little more in training because I knew I was going to reuse it many, many times, right? Now, if you have a single problem where, like, you know, you're going to need only 5 runs of optimization, training a surrogate model, your R is not going to be that big, right? So you need to see if your problem really fits the surrogate model approach or not. The main frustration I have about scientific AI for surrogate models of PDE properties is that it needs to relearn governing equations from data that is generated via costly simulation. So we know Maxwell's equation for more than a decade, more than a century, and now we're trying to learn it again via a data process. And just it seems wasteful to me. It seems redundant and wasteful. And so there's a limit to that frustration, which is basically the effort of scientific AI, which is, well, let's try to leverage model architecture. We saw FNO, which is trying to leverage in some way nonlinearity and Fourier transform. Or even introduce PD information of field knowledge inside the problem. So field knowledge might be, I know that my problem has some sort of symmetry, and I'm going to have an architecture that has the same symmetry. PD information might be, oh, I can introduce it in some ways like a loss function. Well, I'm going to present another method which introduces the physics by adding a numerical solver as a layer of the neural network. This is physics enhanced deep surrogate models. That was published in Nature Machine Intelligence a couple of years ago, as I started my tenure track. And so you have you have training data here that come from those high fidelity Maxwell simulations. That's the frustrating part I was telling you about. We know Maxwell's equation, but we still need to use them to create data and then learn from it. That's the frustrating part. And then there's another type of baseline, which is a neural network, a purely data-driven neural network, which doesn't know about Maxwell's. Is just going to learn it from data. PET is something that does a little bit of both. So it will also only predict that property that we care about, so not the full solution. And it has a solver as the last layer. Now, the point of PEDS is to be accelerating evaluation, right? So in order to be faster at evaluating, we need to cut some corners. And so here, that solver is low fidelity. It has low fidelity compared to this one, and that's why it's much faster. But because it's low fidelity, it also comes at a cost. It's very low accuracy as well. And so that's where the neural network comes in. We try to learn the coefficient input here, like the approximate geometry that relates to our true problem that would feed our low fidelity model so that its prediction of the complex transmission is correct. So it's creating an artificial geometry that makes our low fidelity Maxwell solver correct. Another way to put it is that it's leaving the nonlinear mapping to the neural network, and it's leaving the physics to a solver. To me, it makes a lot of sense. And so we saw already just the presentation just before mine that neural networks, they can pick up some inaccuracy from in the talk before. It was from aberrations of the device. Here, that's just artificial inaccuracy. It's the inaccuracy from the low fidelity of my model. Hopefully that was clear how the model works, and we see great benefits. So in low data regime, when you have just a few hundred parameters here, it's you have a structure that's to compute the complex transmission through a structure that has about 10 parameters. So we already suffered the curse of dimensionality, and so you have a plane wave coming at a frequency though. So it has an additional physical parameter, which is the wavelength. So you have all those parameters in low data regime, even though like this is still a 20% error. It's not usable for optimization, but we're 3 times better already just by adding information from the solver, the low fidelity solver. And something that is exciting here is that we reach a few percent error, which is then sufficient to be dominated by fabrication error and so usable for design. Within a reasonable amount of training points, where the purely data-driven approach is nowhere near. It also extends to other physics. It's not just particular to Maxwell. So I did it for the diffusion equation, the reaction diffusion equation. In those cases, actually all the low fidelity solver were just sacrificing on resolution, trying to have like a much coarser resolution, too coarse to be accurate in itself, but the neural network picks up this inaccuracy. And in the case of the reaction diffusion, which is a nonlinear PDE, the low fidelity solver is also solving the linear relaxation of the PDE. It's just solving the diffusion equation. The neural network also picks up that inaccuracy. It's very interesting. And so here we do get the speed up. It's not 10 to the power of minus, it's not 10 million as before, but because we have that solver layer, but it can be up to 10,000, especially for when you have a nonlinear equation. And also, so we trained a neural network only, so a purely data-driven model with 100 times more points and still could not reach the accuracy of PET. So we have at least 99% reduction in training costs. Now that's great. If I could have that reduction for that discount for my house, that would be great. So that's about physics-enhanced deep surrogates. Now I'm gonna spin it if I have some time. I think I do. Do I have some time?
15 minutes? Yes.
Okay, perfect. So I'm gonna continue on this same idea of pipelining a neural network and a PDE solver. So this, by the way, I call it, and it's called, it's not just me, input space machine learning, where you're learning only the input to a solver and you leave the output untouched. What I like that in PETs because then it lets me look at what the low fidelity solver computed and see whether I trust the transmission it computed or not. So it enables me to interpret a little more than like a purely a pure neural network. In that case here, we're using a similar architecture for a very different application. Here, the idea is to learn a representation of a design space. So I have those very large scale designs, many dimensions, and I want to learn a good representation of this design, because if I just change one parameter in this large scale design, it doesn't change things significantly. So I have many parameters, but in a way, they're kind of meaningless. Because if I change one of them, it's not going to change my goal. So I want to change the parameterization, maybe even make it low dimensional, but so that like when I change my parameters, it actually changes things a lot. It changes the geometry a lot and the goal as well. It's more true that it does when you keep your design with the many parameters. If you change the structure, it doesn't change the geometry that much. Now, sometimes you might have a very sensitive diffraction pattern. It might actually you might have a very ill conditioned problem where even change it a little bit, that geometry will change your output very much. I'm just qualifying what I just said, but it's still not very insightful as a designer. When I change a parameter, I don't see a change on the geometry. So learning an input representation, a representation of the design, is very useful. We'll see an application that makes it useful. And here the PDE solver is the actual PDE solver. So I'm just using machine learning to learn a representation of the space, but I'm not using it to learn any physics. I rely on a PDE solver to do that. So I hope that that's clear. The problem is that like to have a good representation of good designs, I need good designs. So so in a way, I need to have solved my problem already in order to train such a parameterization. So it's a chicken and egg problem. I'm gonna show a solution to that. And a good thing with that representation, so that parameterization, that search space, I call that all those names, is that it can leverage pre-trained representation. So it might be gain data efficiency from that. What Fanny was presenting on this idea of quote unquote foundation that like basically can learn with less data because it's pre-trained. I think this like really translates here as well, very well. And the geometry level, here we're not learning any physics. We're just learning a geometry. And the great thing about geometry is that then you can apply any physics on it. It's geometry, it's physics agnostic. So it's more transferable in general, even to other physics or even to other objectives. So it's not just like linked to one property. It's going to give you good designs, and then you can see if it translates well from one property to another. This was work that was done at Georgia Tech by a student I mentored, Reza Marksban, who is in Ali Adibi's group, who did the experimental validation of this work. And so we created a method, and the application we worked with was that of a polychromatic deflector. So you want to send incoming light for red, green, and blue at a 41.3 degree angle, and you want them to all perform about the same. So the state of the art before our contribution, it was hard to actually have the performance to be equal for red, green, and blue. It's just hard for blue. I think there are losses that appear in the setup that just make it harder. And so the worst case here was at 7%, and the best case was at 22%. They used topology optimization, which is basically using the solver with a pixel representation of the geometry. That's a typical case where changing a single parameter will not change the geometry that much. But topology optimization is a gradient-based optimization technique. So it scales. It is agnostic to the number of inputs because you can compute the gradient very efficiently with a single simulation, the adjoint simulation. So you need one forward simulation to evaluate your property, the adjoint simulation to evaluate your gradient. You just need two simulations, irrelevant of the number, independent of the number of parameters that you have. So it could be billions, it's going to be the same cost. That's the power of gradient-based optimization. So now I want to just show you a little bit like the iterations like topology optimization needs to do to get to a design. First, it unfortunately needs to start from random noise. And then slowly it starts finding a topology. A topology mathematically is just like where you put holes, right? So it decides where to put holes. And then like here it stops at 35. But if you continue, so you can see here, this is the power at different angles. So you can see mostly at 0 when you have a random structure. And the structure is this thing, which is a repeated structure that works in transmission. So this periodic structure starts to have a shape, 18 iteration, 27, it starts to be binarized. And now it starts to look like a geometry that would be usable. And if we look here at the power in function of the angle at 41.3, we're starting to see that like it's starting to increase. It doesn't really look like an optimum. And in fact, you need a few hundred iterations to converge to a local optimum. But it's starting to do some work. The point is that once it gets there, topology optimization just does shape optimization. So it found where the holes are, and then it's changing the size of the holes. So we use that knowledge to create a data set that would contain the information that we need for our designs. So we will not do a data set that is based on random samples because that would be an uninformative data set. We do the data set that has the topologies, but we don't spend the compute time to converge for topology optimization towards a local optimum. We just like consider the topology is good enough information for us to work with to discover a representation. We did that 30 times because we also don't want to have, this is all part of the training cost, and we don't want to have crazy training costs. So we just have 30 designs, and then we increase the number of that designs using a process-inspired method. You know, when you have photolithography, things happen. You have this fabrication errors. Sometimes like your sample was overexposed in photolithography, underexposed. It results in designs that are dilated when, like, for example, here the white is bigger than it should be, or eroded where the white part is smaller than it should be. And so we use that method to actually create more good designs, quote unquote. We didn't compute them, we didn't validate them, but we just created more using erosion and dilation. Okay, and so we have our data generation process. So 30 topologies times 35 steps. We do those erosion and dilation. It extends our training set to 4,000. And now we can and the figure of merit when we optimize. I like to optimize a scalar function instead of a multi-objective, because then you need to work with Pareto fronts and etc. So here we do a worst case optimization. We optimize the minimum efficiency for the 3 wavelengths in the desired angle. Okay. So you can see here, like the worst case is evolving for those all those TO runs. Green is almost always the worst one, but here blue becomes the worst one. On the bottom right, that's what we see. And so basically we see that, like, it's not completely converged at this number of iterations, but since we have a binarized structure and a topology, we stop there. Then we learn the representation, right? The point of the method was to learn the design space. So that structure here, if you just look at it by pixels, it has over 6,000 pixels. But if you change just 1 pixel, you're not going to change the geometry that much. Here, we decided to change it to create a bottleneck so that, like, really we will parameterize the structure with just 8 parameters. And we use the pre-trained model for the encoding. Because it's a black and white image, we use the vision transformer, something that is already good at dealing with images that are black and white, that we adapted. And so we really have this encoding. Most of it is already trained. We just have a couple layers that we learn to get to our latent space. And then the decoder we need to learn, and it's transpose convolutional layers to create designs. This is how it trained. So an autoencoder, here was a variational autoencoder, which means that we added some structure in the latent space. This autoencoder is just trying to learn the identity function. So, but going through a bottleneck. So if you have an original structure, you would want the reconstructed structure to be very similar. And we see that it does a pretty good job. What it means is that, like, all those designs, they had an underlying latent space. They had some low dimensionality that is captured by that autoencoder. And now we can change only our 8 parameters and see significant changes. As we change just 1 parameter, we see a significant change in the designs. And so we brought back meaning into what a parameter is in our design. And because we have, instead of 6,000 parameters, we now only have 8. And we added a couple more that are hard to differentiate usually, like the period and things like that. And we could enable Bayesian optimization, which usually doesn't scale for many. It also hurts with the curse of dimensionality, but here we have significantly fewer parameters, and we enabled Bayesian optimization. This is a slide I'm going to skip on how Bayesian optimization does exploration and exploitation of designs, and then, like, when in the later steps it really tries to exploit its model. And that way we enable a design where the worst case theoretical power is 24%, which was significantly better than the previous topology optimization approach. And again, here we overall needed less, about an order of magnitude less data simulations than topology optimization. Topology optimization, especially for problems with many local optima, needs multiple runs. Here it's, with 70 runs, we could get to a result of 19% of worst case. And they need also 200 iterations to optimize, to converge each. So you have about 14,000 simulation. In fact, you need a little more because to take into account fabrication constraints, you usually do 3 simulations, 1 eroded, 1 normal, and 1 dilated simulation. But here we compare just for like if we did one simulation each. And our method, we just needed about 700 data points, 700 simulation to create all our 30 designs. And then we just needed a single run of optimization with 350 iterations of Bayesian optimization. So we're about at 1,000. So we already saved in a single optimization. So here we don't need any reusability in a single optimization run. In an optimization goal, we do better than topology optimization. This device was fabricated and measured. So we did have a slight drop also for blue, but it's still significantly better than the previous state of the art. So we were very excited by this new state of the art. And as I said, once you have a representation, you can reuse it. It's pre-trained. You can reuse it for other things. So we try to use it for, instead of like optimizing for a 41-degree angle, use it for just 30-degree angle. And we got a worst case of 20%. So it sounds like even without retraining at all, it does a pretty good job at transferring. Of course, like this is still a fairly similar figure of merit. It's still an open question whether it would still be useful for more drastic change of figure of merit. And when it doesn't work, is it still useful as a good warm start? So can you start from that, the optimization? I hope this presentation was exciting to you. I have in all those directions more projects coming up. And again, I am a theorist, right? So if you do experimental work, or if you have connection with experimental groups, I'm happy to talk further for collaborations. It takes a village to do research. I want to acknowledge my collaborators and my new sponsors. I hope I convinced you that there is a to do with surrogate-based models and solvers, and in particular with input space machine learning. Thank you for your attention.